Our speaker is Míša Hejná from Aarhus University, Denmark. Today, she presents her talk on the topic, Love is in the Airwaves. Romantic and sexual desires can be signaled via different vocal attractiveness strategies.
Hello, my name is Míša Hejná, and in this talk I'm interested in whether or not romantic and sexual desires can be communicated through different vocal profiles, through different voices that we can adopt. And so first, let me provide you with some background. I know there are a lot of people from different disciplines. I'm a sociolinguist and a phonetician, so I'm very much interested in social functions of the sounds of the languages that we use. And one of my areas is the area of vocal attractiveness. So I am interested, for instance, in when we listen to voices, what determines whether they sound sexually attractive to us or sexy, or do we think if we listen to someone's voice that they might be a very loving and caring partner? So these types of questions. But most of the research that has been done within the field of vocal attractiveness is very much situated within the legacy of sexual selection theory. Most of the work has been done through the lenses of evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, which means that either very explicitly or implicitly, the focus is very much on sexual or physical attractiveness. And one of the things that I think is missing is a focus on love, or actually affection more generally. So I already signaled this by asking, well, do we evaluate people's voices in terms of whether we think they could be a caring, loving partner, for instance, as opposed to a fantastic lover in bed. Okay, so one other gap within the vocal attractiveness studies is also the focus on perception rather than production. So we have many more studies that focus on how listeners perceive attractiveness. There, I should also add, it's mainly heterosexual listeners in their 20s, white, and educated, and typically speakers of English who have been covered in this research. But when it comes to production, so what actually happens when we speak, when we are in a flirtatious context, or if we are in a more sexual context, or if we communicate romantic feelings, there we don't actually know all that much when it comes to the voices that we use. And so my research question is, can different vocal cues, so different aspects of our voice, be used to communicate romantic as opposed to sexual desire? And of course, I should define what I mean by romantic as opposed to sexual. And these are tricky things to define. But for the purposes of this talk, when it comes to sexual desire, I very much mean the physicality of our desires to merge with another human being, so on a very physical level, and the romantic desire in this talk very much tries to emphasize the emotional elements of someone's wish to merge with another human being. Now, of course, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can overlap, but there are also situations where they don't necessarily overlap. So can these different aspects of desire be expressed through different voices, different vocal profiles? And more specifically, in the analysis I'll present today, I'm focusing on the pitch that's used, so how high or low someone's voice is. My pitch is generally lower than the average associated with female voices. And then I'm also interested in the softness of the voice. So, yeah, I'll explain later what exactly I mean by this. But of course, there are many other vocal cues that would be analyzed, and I have already explained what I mean by sexual and romantic. Yes. So, as my data, I have decided to look at mediated language because, of course, ethically, I'm not surprised that there isn't that much research done on what happens with speech when people are having sex or just before sex. It might be ethically a bit problematic to get that type of data in real life. Some attempts have been done, but there aren't that many of them. So I decided to have a look at 5 films, and since most of the research on vocal attractiveness has been done primarily on American English, I also decided to analyze American English films so that I have this contrast with what's been done on primarily sexual vocal attractiveness with also romantic elements of vocal attractiveness. And I picked Friends with Benefits, No Strings Attached, and the 3 Fifty Shades of Grey films. And of course, I had my reasons to pick these. On the one hand, they are all quite popular, but they also emphasize different aspects of desire in interesting ways. So all of these films offer scenes where the sexual is emphasized and the romantic is suppressed, or it's not even meant to be present. But within each film, this changes. And sometimes the different characters have different desires as well. So in 50 Shades of Grey, we start with the male protagonist very much being interested in the sexual, and the female protagonist being very much interested in the more romantic aspect of a constellation between two human beings sexually and romantically attracted to one another. Um, okay. Um, okay. So the vocal phenomena the vocal phenomena I'm analyzing are pitch expressed through what's known as the fundamental frequency. I'd be very happy to say more about it for those interested, and also softness of voice or breathiness. And again, I'd be more than happy to explain why I picked specifically these two features for the purposes of my analysis. And I started with an auditory analysis. I had specific criteria to identify variation in pitch and variation in breathiness. So I listened to all of the films, to each of them twice, and made notes based on just my auditory impression of a phonetician. And then I moved on to an acoustic analysis where I had to limit myself to scenes with no background music, which actually reduces the material that can be analyzed a fair bit. I further reduced this to scenes where we mainly have just two speakers, primarily the protagonist, who's a female, and the protagonist who's a male. But occasionally I also have scenes where we have each of the protagonists speaking with someone they are not sexually or romantically interested in, so that I have a more baseline, neutral vocal profile as well. And in more extreme scenes, I also made the decision not to include them. For instance, if there was a lot of physical violence, it would have made the analysis much more complex. So those I also excluded. Right now, I have done primarily audio-visual analyses using the acoustic data. So I looked at the visuals of the acoustics of these specific scenes and analyzed them. So I am yet to do a more quantitative acoustic study. Okay. So for those interested, I try to classify different scenes where I have the protagonist speaking with a non-protagonist as a baseline. Then I have the protagonist in a context which is predominantly romantic, in a context which is predominantly sexual, in a context where the two really overlap a fair bit, and then also in some cases I have contexts where none of these is the case. And again, I'd be happy to discuss some of the intricacies of making these decisions for classifications. And what I'm going to say is that in all of these films, there are actually very explicit comments made by different characters in the films that also enable us to infer whether a scene is more romantic or more sexual, or actually more of a mixture of the two, or none of these things. Just to give you some examples, I am going to play just one of the numerous files from each film. So here we have Friends with Benefits.
No relationship, no emotions, Just sex.
Whatever happens, we stay friends.
Swear.
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 Then no strings attached.
Did you look at it?
Yeah, I looked. It was nice. You have a really nice penis.
Nice?
Seems kind of like carefree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus. I don't know where to start. My dad's dating my...
So that's an example of two people who are beginning a friendship, but within the same scene we find out that they are, I mean, the female character mainly is not interested in romance, but she wants sex. And they very explicitly talk about it, and we also have plenty of scenes where the physicality is very explicitly discussed as well and enhanced much more than, for instance, emotions. But we also have other scenes where emotions are discussed more explicitly. And then one more example from the first 50 Shades of Grey film.
I'm not going to touch you. Not until I have your written consent.
What?
So in that scene, we also have a very explicit criterion to classify a scene as sexual. I also classify scene as sexual when the protagonist very explicitly commented on what they would like to sexually do, even if they didn't necessarily end up doing it within the scene. But there are plenty of explicit, quite explicit cues as to which of the types of desire is expressed. Of course, there are also ambiguous scenes. And I can see I'm running out of time. So I'll just summarize the results very briefly. When it comes to the more sexually, physically oriented desire scenes, both female and male speakers lower their mean fundamental frequency, so the pitch becomes lower. Also, the pitch dynamism becomes more restricted. So usually when we speak, generally people like listening to voices that are not too monotonous. So what this means is that in the more sexual scenes, voices are becoming a little bit more monotonous. And also the softness of the voice, the breathiness increases, which we could actually hear in the 50 Shades of Grey example with the with the lip biting. I would like to bite that lip was uttered with a very breathy voice, both in the female and the male speech. In the romantic scenes, we actually find the same thing, except that there is one crucial difference, which is that in the sexual desire scenes, these effects are stronger than in the romantic scenes. This doesn't strike me as surprising because ultimately what's happening in these films is that even though the different protagonists aim at some not very conventional constellations, ultimately within each of the plot, the goal seems to be the very normative, typical romantic relationship where both the emotional and the sexual are combined in a very harmonious way. And so considering this expected overlap, it actually makes sense that we also get this overlap in the vocal cues. But there is still a difference in the degree to which these cues are utilized. I have plenty of visual materials, which I would be very happy to discuss with those who are interested, but I am running out of time. So my conclusion is that vocal attractiveness research, of course, should focus on sexual and physical desire, but it shouldn't focus only on sexual and physical desire. We should also pay attention to the emotional level. If we decide to call that romantic, then I think we should pay attention also to romantic aspects of relationship. So yes, vocal attractiveness research should incorporate the insights from love studies, and I think sociolinguistics generally should incorporate affect and love a bit more than the field has done. And I would also like to say that although in linguistics not everyone would see speech used in films as valid type of data. I think for various questions, I would argue that, well, yes, it's in many ways problematic data, but it can also be super, super, super useful data, especially for social aspects of human existence, which might be ethically extremely problematic to investigate otherwise. And on that, I'll thank you for deciding to listen to this talk, and I hope you have a nice day.